it's working with existing bits of city, with property assets that have become dysfunctional, that are no longer fit for purpose, and bringing them into new use and new value. And it's something that can happen at a range of different scales. So there's, from the neighborhood, precinct scale, right up to citywide regeneration. It's something that is very common in Europe, maybe because by and large they've got much older cities that have become more distressed. But it's become increasingly common certainly in Southern Africa as well. We've got to grips with the cycles of change in our cities and the need for renewal in bits of those.
Cool, that's a good definition. Maybe some examples, just so we know what we're talking about. Rishik, do you want to, what sort of regeneration projects or examples of regeneration come to mind?
I think if we walk 350 steps outside and we cross is it the freeway? Well, sort of the freeway. We enter the V&A waterfront, which was really 30 years ago, I would say a piece of infrastructure and harbour and industrial area, and through sort of careful investment and development have made more than the sum of the parts. So South Africa probably has Africa's best example of what Guy says, precinct scale regeneration, where you generate a value that's long lasting, and it's still going in many ways. It's probably been regenerated. So taking and seeing something that could be an asset. For example, we've worked in Durban on Florida Road, where it was just a combination of, I would say, cottages and some heritage buildings, some not. But our clients invested sensitively in various buildings, and again, the sum of the parts produced value for people, where they want to walk and want to be there. Families walking around at night, going to coffee shops as Durbanites do. And then there's sort of one that I thought about recently. Guy and I also lead a think tank for our sins in our spare time, exploring the opportunity for the Olympics in Cape Town and the Western Cape. And I was in Paris last year looking at how they did the Olympic Games. And if you look beyond the center of Paris, the north part of Paris, Seine-Saint-Denis, they've been doing a 30-year-long regeneration. So there are new rail links, new tram links, new housing projects, and they're still doing it even after the Olympics. So I think there's many good examples on that big scale, but even if you come down to the smaller scale, you start to see that even a single building, you could say that the investment in the convention center unlocked something in the foreshore and crowded in more investment. So I think there are different good examples at a big scale and a small scale.
Cool. Thank you. So I think we've got a good understanding now of what regeneration is. Maybe worth noting what the inverse is. I think if we talk about sort of greenfield development or essentially a clean slate or a site where you can build new and start from scratch and you're not working with what's already there. And inherently a new build will be much simpler and easier than having to work around the constraints of an existing site. So regeneration is most often more complex and one could say difficult. So then what exactly is the case for regeneration? Why would one explore that route or pursue a regeneration project versus a new build? And whether we're talking at building scale or precinct scale. But yeah, Rishik, maybe if you want to touch on just on that, I think just what is the case for regeneration, or why one would pursue the sort of repurposing of assets or taking that path of regeneration?
Yeah, so you're right, it does take time and effort. I think on the technical side, countless studies have said that you probably going to reduce your carbon by 50 to 60% over a 30-year period. You can extend the lifespan of your assets, so you renew it, and then there's more value in the long term. If you've got bulk infrastructure on site, you can get going sooner. I think those are sort of the technical reasons, but I think from our side, what we've seen is there's a resilience to the regeneration. So if there's shocks to the system like COVID, or people suddenly don't like using space in a certain way, you can adapt quicker. And then secondly, there's sort of an emotional side to it where people actually want to be in a place. They're not forced to be in a place. So regeneration really focuses on bringing people, different functions, different users, and in the long term, there's a greater resilience in terms of your investment. Do you want to add to that, Guy?
Do you want to touch quickly? I mean, it is quite interesting. Just on the Olympic bid and that project. I remember seeing something about the potential for the Olympics in Cape Town, and what was quite significant was the ability for Cape Town to actually potentially host the Olympics, making use of a significant amount of existing facilities, and obviously with some retrofitting or sort of additions or adaptation to make them fit for purpose. But really interesting there's generally, I think, our experience of the World Cup, where you have a need for a massive amount of investment in sort of new facilities that kind of get mothballed. That's kind of the general kind of, post-Olympic kind of this argument against a city hosting the Olympics, essentially. Anything you can share about that, or just the from that context?
So I think that is seeing regeneration as a lens. So I think the Paris Games were the first in a big city at scale to demonstrate what that sustainability could look like. So they used Place de la Concorde for 6 sports, skateboarding, and they brought the games into the city, BMX, people flying in the air in the middle of the city. They used exhibition spaces like the Grand Palais and temporary facilities, use those for judo and taekwondo and fencing, which was such iconic, and the Eiffel Tower for beach volleyball. So they really demonstrated that you can use the games to regenerate based on the best of what you have, and where you don't need to build new facilities, you can expand existing assets. So Paris, for example, they needed a swimming pool, so they built a new swimming pool. But the Stade de France is from the year 1998, and they really built on the best of what Paris had to offer. So our thinking, and Guy can agree or disagree, is that for a Cape Town or Western Cape or South African Games in the future, you build on the best of what the city has to offer, the existing infrastructure, the existing hockey facilities, of which there are numerous, mountain biking, and you go from there and you build longer term value for people already using the space. And in the process, you could possibly both environmentally regenerate, so if you're looking at Zekuflei as a wetland, and then physically regenerate some areas like Athlone, bringing new people and new investment to areas that need it.
I will just add to that one, partly to differ from you in terms of which Olympics was the first, because I think actually London 2012 was the first that really put regeneration at its center, and the whole strategy there was behind regenerating a big chunk of the city, using the games to regenerate a big chunk of the city, and bringing that forward to Cape Town. The idea there is that you use the pretext of the Olympic Games to drive investment in stuff that people really need, be it grassroots sports facilities, new housing, transport, and stitching the city back together. So the Olympics is a wonderful grand vision, but ultimately it's a regeneration play where you mobilize massive public sector investment to drive public good and at the same time deliver a lot of private value.
Yeah, interesting. I'd made a note about, I think this looking at regeneration as a reactive thing, I think to sort of prevent decline, or another way of looking at it is sort of more proactive, or where it's a little bit more speculative, or where there's an opportunity to unlock value. But I mean, London, the Olympic bid in London was really sort of maybe a bit more of a really a response to also the collapse of the docks and East London, jobs in East London, and really like this need to kind of regenerate the east of London and catalyze that regeneration around that side of the city, which was quite interesting. So I think just next question here was really about, there was this topic of carbon, and I think obviously a big increasingly an important consideration in development, whether it's kind of mandated through from banks or funders or internally, or whatever it might be. So in the context of regeneration or working with what's already there or existing structures, maybe what comes to mind is up the road, DHK has been involved with City Park, which is the old Christian Barnard Hospital, which is being redeveloped into the development City Park. There's a Mama Shelter Hotel. Quite an interesting project, but it's essentially, if you look at the construction site, it's basically the bones of what's already there. Don't have to talk to that project specifically, but maybe if you want to speak to, is there anything around from regeneration from that point of view, or from a carbon point of view, that's relevant? Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that we've just been talking about the kind of Olympics and citywide and massive scale, and this is bringing it right back to a much more intimate scale. And we've been involved in a number of projects at that scale, whether it's the Longcliffe precinct that Pierre's going to talk about it in a moment, the Old Cape Quarter precinct that we're doing with RDC, who sitting with us in the room. Guido Cicchetti was on the previous panel. And then, of course, the City Park that we've been working with Ingenuity since they took the building over shortly after the old Christian Barnard Hospital, which used to sit perched on top of that huge multi-story parking garage, a hospital with the best views in Cape Town, until they moved to a new building. I think they moved end of 2016. So it's nearly 10 years we've been working on that, which shows how hard regeneration is. I mean, interestingly, I spoke about regeneration being something that's always at precinct scale, and of course this is a single building. But it's a single building that is highly complex, multiple functions. It occupies a full city block, and it's part of the ongoing narrative and process that is actually the regeneration of Cape Town CBD. But to City Park itself, when the Christian Barnard Hospital moved out, and you were left with a three-story shell on top of a parking garage with fantastic views, and it took rather a long time and many iterations before we figured out quite what was the right approach to that. And Casada coming on board, joining forces with Ingenuity, and delivering the Mama Shelter Hotel and residences, and there's some office above there as well, while retaining the parking structure, because actually that parking structure is very functional, but it's also one of those parking structures that is built parking on ramps, not on flat slabs, so you can't really convert it. So that's the thing about regeneration, is you actually have to work with the stuff that you have and accept its constraints, and deliver as best you can according to those. And out of that process usually emerges something kind of wonderful, kind of magical, kind of quirky, and something that's full of character. So it could be a happy accident to a certain extent.
Maybe on that, I think that example, the waterfront, I think if we're looking at a lot of these cases of successful regeneration, which or comparing them to then maybe where you've had new builds, or places like Century City or Sandton City, where it's kind of a tabula rasa and a clean slate. One could say almost most often the regeneration projects lend themselves to being far more interesting places, but not to kind of, I think maybe to validate that. Are there any, Guy, if you want to answer this, I mean, what are those ingredients that make for a successful regeneration project, or why are they more interesting, or what could be the contributor?
There's a whole host of them, and I can see Ash is trying to get us to shut up and make space for Pierre to come and talk about Longcliffe, so I'll try and be brief. But a lot of the reason that regeneration is so difficult is because you need multiple actors. You always need public sector involvement, or at least public sector facilitation. You need private sector involvement. You need vision. You're working with, as I said, you're working with existing stuff, and that's going to throw all sorts of hurdles in your way. But ultimately, you have something that brings character. You have something that already has place and space and an identity in people's minds. Sometimes you have to work with perceptions, work against existing perceptions and transform perceptions. As much as you're transforming physical infrastructure, you're transforming people's perceptions. So there are all sorts of layers of complexity. But ultimately, I think what leads to successful regeneration is, first of all, a really strong vision, really strong imagination. Being able to reimagine something that has gone into a process of decline. And then it's partnership, working hand in hand, public sector, private sector, multiple landowners often working together, and being patient. And with those three things, and of course, did I mention the word investment? It takes money, but then all property development takes money. So with regeneration, you sometimes need a slightly longer time horizon to see your returns.
Okay. How much time do we have? Okay, we were done. Okay. Cool. Okay, Pierre's going to share an example of, I think, just also on this topic, but if we do have a moment for a question or two, maybe we can do that afterwards, but let's see.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, guys.